Good morning. Welcome to our Managing Drought in the Southern Plains webinar series. I am Margaret Boone, Program Manager with the Southern Climate Impacts Planning Program, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. Rachel Riley, SCIP Associate Program Manager, is managing the webinar. Today's webinar will feature a regional drought monitor update from Brian Fuchs with the National Drought Mitigation Center. David Miskus with the Climate Prediction Center will give a big picture overview of the Climate Prediction Center's forecasts and advisories. We will also be joined by the region state climatologist, David DuBois from New Mexico, John Nielsen-Gammon from Texas, Gary McManus from Oklahoma, Mary Knapp from Kansas, and Pat Guinan from Missouri. And I'm sorry, Pat, that we do not have a picture shown of you. And they will give the updates for their specific states. I would also like to recognize the support of those who made this webinar series possible. Chad McNutt with the National Integrated Drought Information System, or NIDIS, David Brown, NOAA Regional Climate Services Director for the Southern Region, and Mike Hayes of the National Drought Mitigation Center. We'd also like to take a minute to highlight our ongoing Field Photos Weekend. The next weekend will be over Labor Day, so August 31st through September 2nd. We'd like as many folks who can to take pictures of the landscape around them, and then they can email those to us and we will put those in a database. And the website for more information is listed, southernclimate.org/fieldphotos. These webinars are designed to improve communication across our region and to help those agencies and organizations that are managing aspects of the drought. Your interests and needs are important to us. We encourage you to help us select presentation topics either through emailing us or through the chat box listed. You may ask questions or make comments at any time through typing in your chat box. Each webinar is recorded and posted on our SCIP YouTube channel. A 2-page PDF summary will also be prepared following the webinar and will be available next week on our website and our SCIP Facebook page. We will put up a list of resources, including these links, again at the end of the presentation. So now I would like to turn it over to Brian Fuchs with the National Drought Mitigation Center.
Thank you, Margaret, and good morning, everyone. Hopefully broadcast is going over okay. It seemed to be fine through my speakers. So what I'm going to do today is just give an update of what's happening not only throughout the U.S. but region-specific to the Southern Plains. Quite a bit of change has been taking place over the last few weeks, so let's just dig into it right away and go to the first slide. To start off with, I'm going to take us back a ways, and this is going to take us to the beginning of the calendar year. And this was the drought monitor that was released at the beginning of the year. And you can see that going back through the winter months, that drought continued to be a serious issue, not only in the Plains states, but also into the Midwest, and also starting to see drought developing out in the western U.S. at that time. Looking at the Southern Plains specifically, there was still quite a bit of D3 and D4 through much of Oklahoma, into Texas, eastern New Mexico, parts of southern Kansas, and then also branching out into portions of Arkansas and Louisiana with some dryness showing up. Going forward to the next slide, we have the map that I created for this week's release. So you can see that in some of those areas of eastern Oklahoma, northern Texas, into the Panhandle of Texas, we did see quite a bit of recovery since the beginning of the calendar year. Going further north into parts of southern Kansas, again, more recovery, and some of that has been recent. So again, some of this big turnaround has been over the last month or so. Going further to the west, though, you see into portions of eastern Colorado and eastern New Mexico, even with some of the recent rains, with the strong monsoon that has been setting up, we're still battling some multi-year issues in these parts of the country that we'll talk about here a little bit further. Next slide, please. So currently, what we're seeing at the bottom of this slide here is we're at 45.49% of the lower 48 in drought. At the calendar year, this is at 61%, and the start of the water year, this is at 65%. So about a 20% decrease in drought across the United States since the water year. Basically, since the peak at the end of September of 2012 of drought across the United States, we have seen some steady rains in places, snows in other places through the winter, and we've seen this systematic decrease of the amount of the United States in drought, even though there are some areas that are still being hampered by some significant drought at this time. Next slide. Going back to January again here on the southern plains, you can see again the areas that really were being impacted. A lot of Kansas, a lot of western New Mexico, and then spotty areas, western Oklahoma, eastern New Mexico, and then some spotty areas yet in Texas. At the start of the calendar year, we were at 83% of the region in drought. 43% of the region was in extreme to exceptional drought. So still very significant drought taking place as of January 1. Moving forward to the next slide for this week's map, and I apologize for the offset of those values in the red circles, but what I wanted to highlight was currently we're at 71% of the region in drought, and that compares to the start of the calendar year. Again, that was 83%. But one of the big things that we've seen, especially over the last month or so, has been that extreme to exceptional drought. Currently, we're at 30% in extreme to exceptional, and that compared to the calendar year of 43%. So a good drop off there. And even since the water year, we're seeing D4 conditions go from 14% of the region to right at 10%. And again, some of these areas are seeing some precipitation here, and with the long-term deficits, the long-term impacts, some of these areas are going to be slower to improve than others. I know we've had quite a bit of rain in eastern Oklahoma and into portions of Kansas just over the last couple weeks, and that has allowed for rapid improvement, but even some of these areas are still showing some impacts of the dryness, and maybe that will be changing again with some of the rain that's been recorded since the release of this week's drought monitor. So again, some steady improvements in the region, but still battling some drought issues and even some recent expansion of the drought in places like southern Texas. Next slide, please. Just some time series going all the way back to 2000 to present, looking at the respective states. And you can see here over time with Oklahoma and Texas that drought has been part of the landscape, and we can go back all the way to about 2010, the fall of 2010, when we saw a lot of this drought developing. And we can see the ebb and flow over time of this drought developing, some improvement. I think the Oklahoma depiction shows that quite well with what happened in 2011 with some improvements, and then ramping up with some of their drought then in late 2012 and into 2013. Next slide. You can see the same type of information for New Mexico, where conditions have been fairly dry and ongoing all the way back to 2010, early 2011. But we can see throughout the last decade or so that drought has come and gone through this area. And even in Louisiana on the bottom slide, we can see that drought right now has not been an issue, but we are seeing things dry out, and not in the too far recent history. We have seen drought issues in Louisiana. So just a sample of some of the time series available from the drought monitor data. Next slide. Looking at the NLDAS soil moisture model, and this is again what I'm showing is the top 1 meter of the soil. Looking at the different percentiles, what really stands out is some of the greens that are showing up in Kansas and in Oklahoma, with the recent improvements over the last 4 to 6 weeks or so. But there still is a tight gradient as you go east to west. As you start getting into central Kansas and into western Kansas and the Texas and Oklahoma panhandles, you can still see that there are areas that are very deficient of soil moisture, especially in that top 1 meter. Kind of a unique area is the far western panhandle of Oklahoma. You see this area as being white, and that's Cimarron County. And it really tells you how spotty some of these precipitation events have been. That, again, this is dated August 3rd, so it is a little bit older. But what you're seeing is, Cimarron County had picked up quite a bit of rain, and some of the feedback from Gary McManus this week in doing the drought monitor, he was describing reports of things greening up and water starting to pond in some of these areas again. And you go to the next county over to the east, and that's not the case. They've missed out on these precipitation events. So in some of these areas, we have seen widespread precipitation, such as in central Kansas into central Oklahoma. But in other areas, it has been very spotty, and showing improvement on such a small scale is difficult if we don't have the data. So looking at some of these products is very helpful in showing the nature of just how some of the precipitation has been since the first part of July. Next slide. Looking at the 14-day average stream flows across the country, you can really see those areas that have been picking up significant precipitation. All along the eastern coast of the United States, especially into the southeast, there's been significant rains through most of the summer, and we haven't had too many discussions about dry regions or even drought at all, pretty much as you go east of the Missouri River Basin. As you go further west, you do start seeing more of those orange and red dots show up on the lower stream flows on the rivers and streams. And you can really see in parts of Oklahoma and Kansas where those most recent rains into southern Missouri. I know Pat Guinan had passed along some information about flooding in his state, and I think that's continuing with some of the rains over the last few nights as well. You can see some of these stations are maxed out as far as they're seeing record flows for right now. In parts of southern Texas and into central Texas, it is spotty, and some of these are controlled rivers, so as they're holding water back in one area, it is decreasing the flow further downstream. And so what is very helpful for the drought monitor authors is to have that local knowledge of what's really taking place on those rivers and streams and how managed they are at any point in time. But you can still see that there are some hydrological issues going on in the southern plains. As you go further west, you're starting to see more and more of those lower stream flows pop up throughout much of the west as they are really battling some not only dry conditions, but also that they've been the one part of the country that has been warmer than normal through most of the summer. Next slide, please. Just some snapshots from the ACES data sets to look at some time frames on the data that is available. On the 30-day ACES departure from normal precipitation product, you can see that with the grid analysis here, the region as a whole is doing pretty good. There are some spotty areas of dryness looking at southwest Louisiana and portions of Texas over the last 30 days, but a lot of areas seeing surpluses over the last month or so. Even on the 60-day depiction down on the lower left, you're seeing a little bit more of that departure of 0 to 2 inches, but still a lot of areas that have had above normal precipitation over the last 60 days or so. Next slide. Looking at the water year, though, departures from normal in ACES, you can still see that since this current water year began in October 1st of 2012, some of those areas of southeast and eastern Texas are still looking at deficits of anywhere from 12 to 20 inches during that time frame. And as you go through the region, central Oklahoma really stood out to me that we're finally showing a surplus in this region after multiple years of drought, that we can go back to this water year and see that surplus. But you can see that as a whole, the region has still been dry over the last current water year. And then looking at the 12-month departures on the lower left, you can see that even a little bit more prominently as the Gulf Coast of Texas and into extreme northeast Texas, southwest Arkansas, into portions of Louisiana and Oklahoma. A lot of these areas are still looking at departures anywhere from 4 to 8 inches over the last 12 months. Even worse along some of those coastal areas where departures are 16 to 20 inches, and that's just over the last 12 months. So that brings up that point that I made earlier, that even with some of these rainfall events that have been beneficial and we are seeing some short-term benefits from them, that long-term drought signal is still very prominent through much of the region. Next slide, please. Just looking at some of the SPI products over the last 30 and 60 days, and you can see that based on the standard precipitation index, looking at a lot of positive values through the southern plains, even into the central plains. Portions of the Midwest are drying out here in the last 30 days or so. On the 60-day SPI, we are seeing a similar signal, very pronounced through the southern plains. As you go into portions of Louisiana and East Texas, that we are seeing that dry signal at the 60-day time frame. Next slide. And just to zoom in on the region on the 60-day SPI, you can see those areas of Louisiana and East Texas and up into portions of southeast Arkansas, where some D2 has been introduced in the last couple weeks, and the water year SPI down below. Again, we're still seeing that since last October, some areas most areas are still running negative SPIs. Again, it's worse along the coastal regions of Texas, but you still see some of those greens in Kansas and Oklahoma showing up. Eastern New Mexico, we are seeing, again, that spottiness of the monsoons as they've kicked in. The region as a whole is still showing a dry signal for the water year. Next slide. I think that was my last slide, yep. So my contact information is up here with my phone number and email address. I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any right now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brian. I'd now like to turn it over to David Miskus with the Climate Prediction Center. David?
Thank you, and thanks for the invitation. This is my first webinar with you guys, and I was asked to give an overview of the CPC outlooks nationally, but I'll try to talk, of course, regionalize it for the southern plain area. We've been talking about the latest Enso Advisory. The monthly just came out yesterday. We have weekly updates, of course. Very briefly, the updated hurricane outlook, which also came out yesterday, which may or may not impact the southern plains. I think the last time we had a significant tropical storm was Hermione, I think, a couple of years ago, which did help the southern plains, but it's been a while. And then I'll close the monthly and seasonal temperature, precipitation, and drought outlooks. First of all, like I said, I'll talk about the Enso Advisory, and for those of you that don't understand, of course, or are not sure about it, probably most people do know, if you have a La Nina episode going on, it usually means a drier and warmer weather across the southern tier of states, especially during the winter and spring months. And El Nino, which we haven't had for a while, usually brings wetter and cooler weather across the southern tier of states. All right, now, yeah, you already got the slide. Current conditions right now, this is the time series. Basically, on the right-hand axis there is off the coast of South America. The left-hand side is out in the Western Pacific. And the bottom portion of that is the current conditions right now. You can see in the off the coast of South America, the sea surface temperatures are actually averaging below normal. Out in the far Western Pacific, they're above normal. At first glance, someone might think, oh, maybe this is La Nina. But, all right, next slide. You also look at the slices. You can see the various Nino regions 1 through 4, where we take it across the equator. Also, the closer you get off the coast, you can see how the SSTs are also below normal in the last couple of months here. So I'll go ahead and enter. Next slide. So if you look at the last two slides I just showed, one may be inclined to think La Nina. However, next slide, we have a lot of other indices that we look at. So just besides SSTs looking rather cold off the coast right now of South America, we look back every week and see how consistent these anomalies have been. And if you go back to early July, compared with the current SSTs for the latest week, it's a mixed signal right there off the coast of South America. So it's not a consistent cold signal and getting colder and colder. So that's one of the things we've been looking at. Next slide. We'll also look at the upper ocean conditions in the Equatorial Pacific from 0 to 300 meters, not only the surface but going down further. And at the top graph there, where we have the blue arrows, which is a La Nina, and the red arrows, which is a El Nino. If you look at the far right-hand side, where we're currently at right now, the conditions are not showing a La Nina signal. The lower ocean conditions are actually warmer, and I'll show that in the next couple of slides here. So even though the surface, right at the surface, is very cold, the further down you go and the little further west you go, it's actually above normal. Next slide. That's what I'm talking about. The the lower oceans there, you can see, going from 0 to 300 meters. It was colder than normal back in earlier this year, but it has since slowly warmed up. It's actually now above normal. You take that slice from 180 east to 180 west. 180 to 100 west. So, unfortunately, the positive anomalies have been developing, and it's another signal why we have not called for a La Nina yet. Next slide. And going, like I said, going back in time, if you look at that same kind of slice, going back to early June to current, the warmer temperatures below the surface have slowly been creeping towards the east, and the cold that was off the coast of South America is actually slowly dwindling away. Next slide. Also looking at the wind anomalies and the tropical outgoing long-wave radiation. Really off the coast of South America, there's no winds at all. They're very near normal right now, so you don't have those winds pushing towards the west, bringing those colder sea surface temperature anomalies towards the west. Again, not a typical La Nina signal. And everything we looked at, except for like the sea surface temperatures off the coast, is just not showing a La Nina signal right now. Next slide. So if you look at the various, the ONI, the Oceanic Nino Index, that's based on the SST departures from average in the Nino 3.4 region. And it's the principal measure for monitoring, assessing, and predicting the Enso. And like I said, looking at all the indices and looking at the current ONI, it's currently at minus 0.2. So that basically still keeps us in a neutral condition right now. Next slide. If you go back now, we take the ONI indexes for 3-month periods and average them. And if they're below or above 0.5 or negative 0.5 for 5 running months in a row, then it would be either a La Nina or El Nino. You can see where it was red, that was an El Nino signal for that period. Blue would be a La Nina. You can see recently, the last several seasons, it looked like last year in 2012, July, August, September, we were thinking we were going to go into El Nino, and it suddenly fizzled. And we went back to neutral conditions. Things started getting cold again off the coast of South America. It looked like everything was getting negative. Possibly a La Nina was developing, and then that fizzled. So we've pretty much been in a neutral condition now since the last La Nina ended back in spring of 2012. So what's expected for the future right now? Next slide. Based on the best modeling right now here, unfortunately, it looks like Enso neutral conditions are going to continue. There is a slight hint, if you're looking versus La Nina versus El Nino, a little better chance of a La Nina, but still the Enso neutral conditions are still the best overall odds going into spring of 2014. What we're pretty sure right now, the forecast we have is definitely Enso neutral conditions through the fall of 2013. And when you don't have an El Nino or La Nina, it makes it a little tough to do some long-range forecasts because those signals are, so, I shouldn't say accurate, but quite familiar to work with when you're doing the 3-month outlooks. Next slide. Also based on the various models and ensembles, this was done back on July 16th. There'll be an update mid-August, but again, all the models and various models are still showing near neutral conditions here. A slight tendency towards warming, but definitely not a El Nino. Next slide. Okay, so in summary, I said a lot of, didn't give any hints of whether, well, fortunately, where we are now is where we're going to stay, it looks like. And so neutral conditions are going to continue. SSTs are near average across the western and the central Pacific, and below average across the eastern. However, all the other conditions are still pointing towards neutral conditions, and it is favored into the fall of 2013, and some of the models from IRI and CPC have it into the spring of 2014. All right, next slide. All right, very quickly, I want to talk about the hurricane update here. The initial one was done May 23rd. It said hurricanes can be, of course, a big impact if it does get into the Gulf Coast and come in around Texas, Louisiana. We haven't seen that for quite a while. I think Hermione was the last one that did that. So the initial outlook did have about a 70% chance of above normal conditions here, showing all the favorable conditions, easterly jet, warmer ocean conditions, high pressure in the upper atmosphere, warmer ocean. Next slide. And we are also in an activity of above normal hurricanes since the mid-1990s. And back on May 23rd, the initial outlook, it did have it's a 10% chance of above normal conditions right now. And so far in the Atlantic, it hasn't done very much here. We only had 4 tropical storms. We really haven't done much. But the latest update, which is on the next slide, is pretty much keeping to the same story that we had on May 23rd. The main season does start from mid-August through October, so we still really haven't reached the peak of the hurricane season. We still have a 7% chance of above normal in the Atlantic Basin. Named storms slightly less than the May 23rd one, but still close enough. Hurricanes, 1 less, 2 less, and slightly less on major hurricanes, but still they're calling for above normal season. And the only problem with this doesn't say how many of these storms will make landfall or where they're going to go. So we keep an eye on it right now. Nothing going on in the Atlantic Caribbean Basin, but if it is active, and maybe a few of them will get into the Gulf Coast and may provide rain to Texas. Who knows? Maybe not. But it's something we'll be watching our eyes out in the next couple of months. All right, next slide. All right, Brian just talked a lot about the drought monitor. I just wanted to go over that very quickly and then go into the various outlooks. Next slide. This is the improvement. Brian didn't show this, and it hasn't been updated for a couple of weeks, but this does show the various, this is based on the July 30th drought monitor. Rich is on vacation this week, so we didn't update it. But areas in green and blue show the improvements here over the various time periods. The brown's deterioration over the same time period. You see various 1 week, 4 week, 3 months, 6 months, calendar year, and water year. And it does show really how much improvement has occurred here since the water year, calendar year, across the northern, central, and southern, basically, like I said, from the Missouri River Basin eastward right there. Also some scattered improvements in Texas and Arizona here. So next slide. Also the current conditions, I also want to talk on the left-hand side, the upper left, the map's showing how this is the 3 month, in this case, June, July, August, the summer months, based on climatology, how much of the annual precipitation normally falls during these 3 months. And the areas in green are more than 25% normal. If the precip fell equally across all the months, you'd have 25% for the 3 month period. So anything in green is showing where a lot of the precipitation will fall during these months here. Brown would be much less, which is expected in the far west. They don't get much during the summer. But as you head into the late summer and early fall, August or October, which is the bottom left panel, you can see how the rainfall really starts to decrease across the plains. So what we're seeing right now in August, this is a critical month here. The rainfall would normally starts to decline in September and October. It really drops off in October. So hopefully we can get a lot more rain here this month and maybe in the early September, especially in the high plains and the southwest. On the upper right, again, just showing the soil moisture conditions, pretty much wet in the east and a mixed bag across the central plains. Southern plains still very dry. We also showed the rivers, mixed bag in Texas. All right, next slide. Short term right now, 5 day, again, more heavy precip across the Central Rockies, Central Plains, Kansas, and Missouri, into the Tennessee Valley, and into the Mid-Atlantic and up the East Coast. Unfortunately, it looks like Texas and the Southwest is going to miss out in the short term. Maybe some rain still in New Mexico, and maybe some more rains up in the northern and north central plains. Next slide. Based on CPC 6 to 10 day outlooks again, still what a pattern from where the storms come from the northern plains, like around Montana, head to the south across the central plains, and then they'll pick up moisture in the southeast and the mid-Atlantic. And it'll also be cool across the eastern U.S., hot in the southwest and the northwest. For 8 to 14 on the next slide. Pretty much a similar pattern, still cool in the east, warm in the west. And again, still pretty much odds favor above normal precipitation in the northern plains and the eastern portion of the U.S. Fortunately, dry there in the Four Corners states and Arizona, New Mexico, and western Texas. So not good there. And the heat continues. All right, next slide. All right, since I was talking about the El Nino, La Nina, we're still at Enso neutral conditions. It's really hard to, there's no guidance from the Enso neutral conditions. So what we've been relying on now is our statistical and dynamical models. This is just an example here of some of the tools that we use for the August temperature map. And we found out the dynamical models, the NME, the CSS version 2, and other models have actually been doing pretty well in the short term here for the month. So we've been using some of these. This is just a very broad brush view of some of our tools, so we have a lot more to look at. But just to give you an idea of what they're showing right now, and they are showing cooler temperatures in the east and kind of warm in the west. Next slide. So based on the dynamical models that we've been looking at here for the 1 month update for the month of August, we were showing good favorable odds for cooler than normal in the upper Midwest and portions of the east, and keeping the heat in the west. The next update for the month of September will be August 15th. Next slide. Similar again for the precipitation, not much to go on with the Enso neutral conditions, so using the dynamical models, which have been doing pretty well the last several months here. It's really the only guidance we have right now, because the statistical models really do rely on a La Nina or El Nino to give them some kind of credence. Once again, the dynamical models are showing for the 1-month precip. Next slide. Pretty wet conditions again across the southeastern portion of the U.S., also showing the above normal precipitation expected for August, parts of Arizona and New Mexico, and also the wetness up in Montana, the northern plains. And we could probably, some of the other could have extended that maybe further into the central plains, like around Kansas, but there were other indicators that didn't do it. So this is about the best favorable odds that the forecaster could produce for the month of August, which was made at the end of July. All right, next slide. Based on this, the monthly drought outlook, which came out also at the end of July, is trying to show one category improvement by the end of August across the parts of the Southwest, Arizona, New Mexico, Kansas, and into Missouri and northern Arkansas. And I also want to thank the southern region for working with Rich Tinker, who was the author of this, gave him some critical input, I believe on July 31st, which helped him expand some of this improvement. Because if you go back one slide, go back, or no, there really wasn't that above normal thing through odds for precipitation across Kansas and Oklahoma and parts of New Mexico. So working with other regional partners, go back to the drought monitor now, drought outlook. You can see how he actually expanded some of that area based on the information from talking to the regional people in the southern plains. So thank you for that. All right, next slide. And I also want to say so far, the first 8 days of August, so far looking pretty good as far as making improvement, well above normal through Missouri, Arkansas, Kansas, and portions of New Mexico, Colorado. So if that holds true, this may verify. We'll just have to wait and see. But so far, so good. We are kind of missing out on the rains across the northern plains. You might have had some improvement across there, but I think at the time it was showing that. Okay, next slide. All right, 3 months again. This was made almost a month ago, so some of this may be a little bit out of date, but this is for the season of August, September, October. Again, showing the warmth in the west and warmth in New England. There was kind of a hint of some possible cooler than normal weather, but it wasn't good enough. But it was enough, though, to keep the warmth away from the Midwest and the Southeast. Next slide. As far as precipitation goes, similar to the monthly, we also have a wet odds are high for wetness across the Southeast in August, September, October season, and also in the Southwest. A lot of it coming from the August information at the time. Next slide. And also, so based on these 3 months outlooks, again, we're thinking at the time the monsoon was going to be active, which so far seems to be a little spotty, but much better than it was the last couple of years, especially in New Mexico. Showed some one category improvement by the end of October. At the time, we'll have to see whether or not that heavy rains have been falling from Kansas and into Missouri and Arkansas will actually throw that development out and show some improvement in that area. But at the time, that wasn't available for the author back on July 18th, that there was going to be wetness through that area. Okay, next slide. All right. So in summary, very quickly, we have Enso neutral conditions now, expected to persist into the fall and possibly into the winter and spring of next year. Updated Atlantic hurricane outlook, still a 70% chance for above normal season. So unfortunately, we don't know where or when where any of these will make landfall, if any of them. Temperature and precipitation outlooks. It says summer precip is very challenging to forecast with the tropical weather, scattered nature of convective rains, with the local summer weather events, the MCTs, versus the large-scale winter weather patterns, a little easier to predict. But the good news is, with decent verifications of the recent dynamical models of both the monthly and seasonal timeframes, more weight was put on their forecasts. So pretty much from August, temperatures above normal in the west, below normal in the Midwest. August precip above medium in the southeast, New Mexico, Montana. For the August, September, October temperatures above normal in the west and New England, and precipitation also above normal in the southeast and also in the parts of the southwest. So that pretty much does cover also the southwest monsoon, above normal medium in eastern Arizona and most of New Mexico, drier to the west. Drought outlooks again, these late summer rains, especially August, early September, will be critical to the plains. In the southwest, drought, the precip begins to decrease in August, September, in these regions, and it sharply declines during September and October in both areas relative, and it becomes very dry by November. So the monthly drought outlook is removal or improvement of drought from Arizona to Missouri and Arkansas, persistence in the rest of the west and the southern plains. The seasonal drought outlook, very similar, with possible development in central Oklahoma and western Arkansas, but not too sure about that right now. But the good news is, like I said, the proposed sanity check light, which we are talking about at the end of the month, which Rich did with the southern region, would be provide better coordination between the monthly drought outlook and the monthly temperature and precipitation outlooks. And we are currently exploring that, and we hope to get that going within a month or two. I think that's the last slide. Any questions? Here's my contact information.
Thank you, David, for an overview of all those outlooks. That's good information.
Okay, thanks.
I'd like to now turn it over to Dave DuBois for an update of New Mexico.
All right, everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Yes.
I had my mute on. Sorry about that. Let's go ahead and advance to the next slide there. Okay, let's talk about New Mexico. Give you a little briefing on the year-to-date, the drought monitoring categories. This was a plot that was similarly shown earlier, showing the percent area of the state of New Mexico over the year-to-date from January to present. And you can see we've got the emergence of D4 in the warmer part of the year, peaking around mid-May, staying about flat for most of the summer until we've got before the monsoon started to kick in. So right now we're about 25%. This was I didn't look at the current drought monitor, but it was about 25% as of last week. And as you can see, we had a little bit of D0 popping back in on the southeast part of the state, and that's kind of a frequent track of some storms there, so that we had some recovery from our drought in that corner bordering Texas. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Great. And I just wanted to kind of bring out some things that we're looking at. There has been some encouragement to look at on a county by county wide using drought monitor data from the from NIDIS, and we put this on our website. So we've been giving this to some of the county extension and some of the soil and water districts about how has drought impacted your county. So we've got this on our website, and this is the current one there is over showing Curry County since the beginning of this most intense part of the drought since fall of 2010. So Curry County, if you're not familiar, is over on the very east side of the state, bordering Texas. As you can see, we got our D4 come and going over the past few years, and then it's sticking with us past in the most recent time. So I encourage you to go, for those listening in from New Mexico, go over to the weather.msu.edu and go and look at our drought page there. So next slide, please. Okay, here's a map of New Mexico precipitation. This is just for July. This is percent of the 30-year normal, showing some really nice. This is some good news that we had of our monsoon kicked in. So much, as you can see, the blues are very good. Those are in the 150+% of normal. So you can see much of New Mexico fared really well in July. A few areas didn't. Notably, the far northwest part of the state, up in San Juan County, and then a few other areas in the northeast part of the state. I drove down from almost from north to south on Wednesday, and I can see that up in Mora County and San Miguel County, there's some areas where you can see recovery on the edge of the D4 area. But then as you drive through some of the areas where there's definite rain, where the blue is, you can see a lot of ponding. Not too surprised about that, but there's still some areas that are having a little trouble responding to even with more than normal rainfall. So it's going to be a while to see some major changes in drought, at least in terms of forage and things that affect ranching. So next slide, please. Okay, next three slides, I just want to bring out our wonderful observers in COCORA's network. We had, since January this year, we had 118 new observers. And I just plotted here, these are 284 observers in our state who have reported at least 25 days in last month. And right now we've got about 472 observers, and just to show the distribution of those and encouragement of those who are in New Mexico to sign up if you haven't. Next slide, please. So I just want to show the Albuquerque area. We have 116 observers there, and just seeing the spatial distribution of rainfall in this area, where we get some very drastic gradients in rain in the mountain areas, more than 5 inches in some areas of the higher terrain, and going down to less than less than an inch in some of the other areas for the month of July, where the airport received 2.77 inches, which is way above normal, 185% of the normal, and that was the ninth wettest on record. But not all parts of the city was so well received for rain. As you can see, there's a red dots in the northwest part of town, up in Rio Rancho. So next slide, please. And the last slide here I just want to show is Las Cruces, another place where COCORA's got started in New Mexico. There's about 85 observers here, growing. I get at least one every week, new observers, and so we fared pretty well in July, at 89% of the normal, and at our co-op station here on campus. But a lot of other observers, as you can see, the blues over in the northeast part of the state are more than twice that amount. So you can see some very sharp gradients, even in a small area of 10 kilometers, 20 kilometers, less than that. So some really good news for us, at least for the month of July, and hoping for the rest of the summer. So next slide, please. All right, so just showing, we've got some really good news for July, but we're still a long way off from looking at some good recovery for the drought. So this is the precipitation, accumulated precipitation for the water year. Like I said, monsoon is off to a good start, but we have a way to go. That solid line in the middle is our normal. The bottom shaded green is the actual, and we haven't seen any rain since August 1st. We've got about a week of not much rain here, and it's this is our second worst water year on record here in Las Cruces, with just a little tad over 2 inches, and our worst was way back in 1893, 94, about with 1.85 inches. So got a ways to go. So next slide, please. Okay, just a lot of news going on. I haven't been on this call for a while, but I kind of lost track of the number of press releases about Elephant Butte Reservoir, because it's an important agricultural source of storage for southern New Mexico. The top part is showing when everything was nice and peachy, when we had a lot of water in the reservoir, 89%, and then look at the bottom, showing what it is just recently, last month, in July 8th, using Landsat, at about 3% of the capacity. So we're at, right now, I looked at the Bureau of Rec numbers, and we're about 3.6% capacity, so still less than 4%. So this is we have the people using this reservoir, as you can see that I put there, they face the shortest irrigation season on record. They received 3 acre inches instead of 3 acre feet of irrigation water. So I've been talking to some farmers, and they said they only had enough water to irrigate maybe 3/4 of their fields, and the rest of it was dry, and the rest of it had to be pumped out from groundwater to irrigate their crops. And the folks who can benefit from monsoon rains are doing well, but those who haven't, notably some of the pecan farmers, it's a costly year. It's one in several years of very costly years in terms of irrigation. So next slide, please. Okay, I just want to show two examples here of one of the rivers that we've been looking at that are fed from mountain snowpack. The Pecos River feeds into the east side of New Mexico. One of the first storage areas in Santa Rosa Lake is showing stream flow 7-day average discharge in the Pecos River back through 2010, when things started to really tank. As you can see, the black line is the actual 7-day flow, and as you can see, it's just slowly declining even below the 5 percentile and into the uncharted territory until the monsoon. You can see those highly spiked or the monsoon rains, and over on the right, the pictures show the actual pictures of the lake volume, and you can see it disappearing over the 1-year period. So next slide, please. Okay, I just my last slide here. I just driving through last week on Wednesday, just to survey kind of the D4 areas, exceptional drought areas. Went through Pecos River. I was pleased to see that the flow going through that river. If I was there back a month ago, it would be just a trickle or even dry in places. So that chart on the bottom right there is showing the Pecos River near that area where I took the picture. Discharge in cubic feet per second from starting in June, so all of June, July, and August, right till about yesterday. And there's little triangles on top of that. That's our long-term median, 84 years of record, and the blue line is the actual flows. You can see, up until the monsoon started, everything was in the 1 cubic feet per second, and then since the rains have started, we've seen some flows that haven't really seen much water in that area until now, and I think even Pecos, the Santa Rosa Reservoir is actually the most it's seen in a while. So there's some good news, and hopefully, we'll see the continuing monsoon. I think the forecast showing some above average precip, hopefully at least in the southern part of the state, and hopefully up north too. So that's about all I have, and I'll take it back to the skip guys.
Thank you, Dave. It's good to see that New Mexico got at least some beneficial rains in July, but I think those reservoir images show the stark reminder that you still have quite a long way to go. Now I'd like to turn it over to John Nielsen-Gammon from Texas.
Thank you. We're doing, in most of the state, a bit better than New Mexico has been until this month, where we haven't gotten quite the benefits, but we're still seeing some decent rains over much of the state. Next slide, please. Let's go briefly over the conditions. I want to highlight new product that is now available from our website. We have been generating high-resolution drought index images for the state of Texas, and now with the help of collaborators at NC State, it's now a national product, so I'm showing you not just conditions in Texas, but in the surrounding parts of the region. This is the SPI for the past month, up to date through August 6th, and you can see rain not just along the Rio Grande in Mexico we just heard about, also central Oklahoma, and then parts of central Texas benefited quite a bit over the past month. This is basically given agriculture in the region enough rain to keep the crops going and make a big difference in north central Texas. Next slide, please. So this is zooming in on a single month image, and as we step forward, we'll look at longer time scales. So the next slide. 3 months, we're already looking at below normal conditions. You can see how dry it's been along the Gulf Coast. Next slide, please. Year to date, dry across most of the state, except for the Trans-Pecos region, which is doing fairly well. Next slide. And then, of course, go all the way out to 3 years, which is approximately the length of the drought at present, and we see how big the deficits are over that accumulation period. And that matters more for the western part of the state than the eastern part, because in East Texas, rain that we've gotten has been enough to occasionally bring reservoirs back to or close to capacity, but West Texas really needs above normal rainfall to do that. None of that has happened in the past 3 years. Next slide. So my last slide is showing Texas reservoir conditions throughout the state. The solid line at the bottom with the diamonds is the current reservoir water storage as a percent of conservation capacity. So right now we're running about 62.8%. The dashed line above that is the previous record going back to 1990 when we had the current set of reservoirs in place. So we've been breaking capacity for time of year records for the past 6 months or so. And we occasional rain in the spring and early summer has allowed us to hold our ground for a while, but we're back on a trajectory which potentially, by the end of September, could see us setting all-time records for basically the amount of unused capacity in Texas reservoirs. Right now we've got really a mixed bag of conditions, not just in space, but also in time, where we've had lots of rain recently in some places on top of long-term deficits, so everything's greening up nicely, but go down a few inches in the soil and you start finding the dry stuff again, which makes it kind of hard to just give a blanket characterization. So that's all I have, and I'll be happy to take questions at the end if there are any.
Thank you, John. I'd now like to turn it over to Gary from Oklahoma.
Thank you. Let's go ahead and take a look at the first slide. And you can see some very unusual rainfall amounts for mid-July through mid-August here in Oklahoma. Summertime drought relief, not something we normally expect, but it's definitely what we've gotten here in the state. Statewide average of about 6.7 inches. It's about 4 inches above normal, but you can see some of those mesonet totals along with the radar overlay from the River Forecast Center in Tulsa that, parts of the state have seen more than 10 inches of rainfall in the last 30 days, which is just incredible, again, for this time of the year. It's something we don't normally expect. But if we go to the next slide, we can see that there are still a few stragglers that need that rainfall down in southwestern Oklahoma, over down into the southeast, also into the central Panhandle. Still a little bit either just close to normal, which is not enough to get you really out of drought, or still below normal. So we still need some rains to spread farther to the southwest and also to hit that central part of the Panhandle. Okay, next slide. But we do still have severe drought impacts remaining in spots, especially in those places I just showed you. Canton Lake, which is a very important lake for recreation in northwestern Oklahoma, also part of the Oklahoma City water supply. It's at 22% capacity. It'll probably come up a couple of percent here with inflow with all the rains we've had the last couple of days, but still extremely low. And then we have Lake Altus and Lake Tom Steed. Lake Tom Steed is the main water supply lake for Altus, and it's at 27%. So, still some dire circumstances going on across parts of western Oklahoma, especially. Next slide. And you can see we started with this picture in January. 100% of the state in at least severe drought. That was at the end of January. Then in right around mid-February, we sort of switched over to a different type of climate regime from the previous couple of years, where it was so dry and so much warmer than normal. It really turned into a cool, wet type of climate. And we can go to the next slide. This is from February 1st through August 9th, rainfall totals. Average of about 24 inches, about 3 inches above normal. You can see the vast difference, though, between the western part of the state, far southwest Oklahoma and the Panhandle, and that we saw in central Oklahoma. But still, widespread drought relief throughout this period, with a lot of that concentrated in the last 30 days. Okay, next slide. And the percent of normal from the mesonet for the February 1st through August 9th period. You can see, again, the stark differences. Central Oklahoma had its second wettest February 1st through August 9th since 1921. Panhandle, on the other hand, had its 29th driest. And the central Panhandle, again, in far southwest Oklahoma, are those places still hurting the most with drought and drought impacts. Okay. And, of course, we ended with this. And this is a sort of already a dated image. It came out yesterday, but we've had a lot of rainfall in the last couple of days since the Tuesday cutoff period to be considered in the drought monitor effort. So we have 38% of the state in drought, whereas, back at the end of January, we had 100% of the state in severe drought. So that just, again, shows how much drought relief we've seen, not only since the mid-February period, but also in just the last 30 days. It's still very uncharacteristic for summer in Oklahoma, especially considering what we've been through the last couple of summers here in the state. Okay. And that was it for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gary. I think, yeah, we have been surprised with the amount of rain, but also very thankful for it as well. I'd now like to turn it over to Mary Knapp from Kansas.
Thanks. Everybody can hear me okay? Everybody's covered quite a bit the change in the drought monitor. I want to show some of it from the stream flow level in Kansas. We've had quite a bit of rain. I think it's important to note that most of this rain has occurred from the last week in July to the first 9 days in August. So the improvement has been very concentrated in that area. Next slide, please. This shows the stream flow levels across going from yesterday morning, and where you see the black triangles are where we're having flooding issues. Down in the south central area, they've actually been under flood watches and warnings for almost 9 days now, which is very unusual. And if you go to the next slide, this is what the Kansas River near Manhattan looked like at the end of February, and that's extremely low flows. If you go to the next slide, you can see those are fishermen walking across the river because the water levels are so low. Again, unprecedented low levels. Next slide. And most of that flow is from releases from the reservoir upstream. This is what it will look like on Wednesday. There's floating debris from the floodwaters and very high water levels. And if you look downstream in the next slide, that's where the fishermen were walking across the water. Obviously, they would be trying it now. And the final slide, if you go, shows where that water levels were. The first, where you see the one, is what the waters were at the time of that first set of images, and where you see the two is where the water level is at the second one. Again, to note the compressed improvement rate, I am still getting quite a few inquiries from insurance companies for delayed plantings, even in southeastern Kansas, which is drought-free by the drought monitor at this time. And the reason for that is we had some rains at the beginning of June, then basically the water shut off for about 6 weeks, and so producers that had planted soybeans were getting very poor emergence stands, and those are the kinds of lingering impacts that are likely to continue to surface for the next couple of months, even though we're getting the improving rain conditions.
Great, thank you, Mary. I know with that flooding that's going on in Kansas, it's also moving on over into Missouri as well. So Pat, would you like to give an update on Missouri?
Yeah, you bet. Thank you. Just a brief verbal report of what's going on in Missouri. We have seen some huge precipitation disparities that pretty much have divided the state in half. Several counties in southern Missouri have reported more than 10 inches of rain just for the month of August, to as little as 0 rainfall in some of the northern counties across northern Missouri. Localized reports of more than 16 inches have been reported across parts of southern Missouri just here in the month of August, and accordingly we have seen some historic flooding and already, unfortunately, 3 flood-related fatalities. And again, as you go northward, just about 100 miles north into Missouri, north of this record flooding, northern and central sections of the state are experiencing abnormally dry, even moderate drought conditions, and several counties across northern Missouri have only received about an inch of rain since July 1st, which is more than about 5 inches below normal, or about 15 to 20% of normal. Obviously, with that low precipitation, crop stress has emerged in the driest areas, with many reports of firing and leaf curling reported, more notably in the upland areas and in areas with higher clay content or sandy content soils. What's mitigated the dry conditions is July and August have been cool in temperatures, and in combination with below normal evapotranspiration rates, that has mitigated the full drought stress potential. But nonetheless, the corn yields are declining due to the high water demand during a very critical growth stage. Soybean growth across northern Missouri has also been slowed down due to the dryness. Hydrologically, unlike last year, the below normal evaporative rates this spring and summer
has had less impact on the surface water supplies, and they do remain, even to this day, mostly adequate across the areas that have witnessed this dry spell across northern and central parts of the state. And that's pretty much just a quick update here on what's happening in Missouri.
Thank you so much, Pat. And I'd also like to just say thank you to all of our presenters and all of those who have joined us today. We will now open it up to any questions and comments that have been posted. I think at least one comment has already been answered, asking about the County Drought Time Series. But for those able, we'd like to, to stay online to continue this conversation, and we'll leave a list of these resources up on the screen for a few minutes. As a reminder, our presentation materials will be posted to the Drought portal, in the Southern Plains section, and a 2-page PDF summary will be prepared and posted early next week. The webinar is also recorded and will be posted to our Skip YouTube page and also to our website as well as our Facebook. As always, we encourage you to continue to spread the word to make sure all of those dealing with the aspects of this drought are part of the larger community and can access support that they need. Yes, and as Mark Schaefer pointed out, please don't forget next weekend our Field Photos project. If you'd like to take pictures, September. That's not Labor Day weekend. That's not next week. August 31st through September 2nd. If you'd like to take pictures of drought conditions or even the flooding conditions in the area, as some places have seen a lot of rain, please do so, and then you can email those to us, skip@mesonet.org, and we can process those. And as Dave DuBois just mentioned, if you were interested to look at those drought monitor time series at least for New Mexico, for the different counties, those are available at weather. The New Mexico State University, so nmsu.edu, and you can view those. So unless there's any other comments, I'd just like to tell our presenters and our participants thank you so much and have a great weekend.